we're talking about the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists and how they shaped our government. The essential question is, how did the Federalists and Anti-Federalists shape our government? So, thanks, Barry. So, growing up, has there ever been an issue where you guys are playing a game, picking teams, and you guys are worried about the fairness of the game? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So usually when you're picking teams for a game, and it's like, oh, all the athletic kids are over here, and we're over here with the kids who aren't so athletic. What do you guys usually do when that happens?
Get upset.
Get upset?
Try to get the teams even and stuff, trade some people.
All right, trade some people. Make it fair so it's not all the elitists versus, or all the strong people versus the weak people. So you guys come up with something that's fair.
Right.
Cool. Well, we're going to talk about how the Founding Fathers, when they're establishing our government and going through those difficulties, what they did. So basically, the Articles of Confederation, which you guys should know about from your history class last year, was a weak document to base a nation on. Referred to the United States as a league of friendship, which everyone kind of mocked. And Congress was the only form of government, but it had little to no power over the entire country and all the other states. Congress also had no regulation over money, so when it came to trading with other countries, the goods and whatnot, there was no national or federal regulation. It was just whatever the states wanted to do. The solution, they're trying to figure out what should they do. Should they have more power to the central government or more power to the states? So the Articles of Confederation were failing with all these different issues. What were they going to do? Develop a federal government or a separated type of government? They believe that a large centralized government is the solution to the Articles of Confederation. All right, they believe that the 2 senators per state and 1 rep per 30,000 people was a sufficient representation for the people. So when the people wanted to have their voice heard in government, they thought that was sufficient enough to have a proper amount of representation in the government. They believe the strong government needs to protect the nation and solve domestic problems. So that was another role of a large government. If something was going on between the states, the federal government would step in and say, hey, no, this is the law of the land, this is what we're going to do, and these are the rules that you guys have to follow. The Constitution lays out the role of the state governments. So anything that the federal government doesn't really have to take care of, the states could decide on their own. So, for example, today, education systems are part of the state, like work unions and whatnot, different parts of the state's power. The Anti-Federalists, very creative name, were opposed to the larger government. They feared that a central government would end up in a bunch of elitists running the government, like they saw in Europe. They didn't want the kings and queens to be in power and abuse their power. Thought the states should have their own governing power, which they do. States do have their governors, but they didn't think it should be the prime law of the land. Or they thought that the states should have the prime law of the land. They thought the Articles of Confederation was failure was a sign of how large government works. So they thought the Articles of Confederation was an attempt for one governing body to control everything. And they're like, see that? That was supposed to control everything. Look how weak it was. Look how it failed. It was not a good thing, and people were not a fan of it. And it insisted on a national Bill of Rights. So the law of the land was, this is the Bill of Rights. Each person is entitled to this in all of the states. And that's about the limit that the federal government had. The Federalist Papers, these were a series of essays published to support the ratification of the Constitution. So these people believed that this was the form of government they wanted. They wanted one centralized government. That's why they wanted the federal, keyword, federal government. And so the series of essays went around. Essay number 10, this is one of the many essays. It was protection from factions or sections of people that oppose the interests of the whole community. So the federal government would step in if there was a group coming around threatening people's life, jobs, security, money, anything like that, the federal government would come in. And then essay 51 was checks and balances for the government. So when you say, hey, how do we get the checks and balances for our government today? Essay 51 of the Federalist Papers is where we got that. Also, essay 57, judicial review, saying they analyze the laws to make sure they're constitutional and they follow to make sure no one becomes too powerful and whatnot. So these are the 3 main essays that help shape our government today. And then this came to the Constitution. It established a new government. The Anti-Federalists had great influence on the new Constitution. And the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments dealing with individual rights, individual freedom, and government personnel. So there's these two parties, just like you guys had two teams growing up, and they thought, hey, these guys have all the athletes, and this might be a better form of government, but we still have our wants and our needs that we need to protect. So what are we going to come up with to solve the problem where you get a little bit of what you like and I get a little bit of what I like? So they worked on the Constitution, came up with the Bill of Rights, and they got their individual freedoms, the government protection from government personnel, and the individual rights. So the anti-federalists got what they want through the Bill of Rights, and the federalists got what they wanted through having the larger form of government, the federal government. So in front of you, you guys have two quotes. One quote is from Melanchthon Smith, and this is from June 21st, 1788. And the other one is from Alexander Hamilton from June 21st, 1788. So I'm going to read the first one aloud. You guys follow along, and as I'm reading this, think about the words that are being said. Think about how they make you feel and how you as a person individually feel about this quote. All right, I'm going to read both quotes to you, and I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to pick which quote you like best. And so once you guys do that, write the name down of who you like best, and then we'll talk about it more. But here's the first quote from Melanchthon Smith. Representatives should be a true picture of the people. They should understand their circumstances and their troubles. Therefore, the number of representatives should be so large that both rich and poor people will choose to be representatives. If the number of representatives is small, the position will be too competitive. Ordinary people will not attempt to run for office. Fall into the hands of the few and the rich. This will be a government of oppression. The rich consider themselves above the common people, entitled to more respect. They believe they have the right to get anything they want. So once again, that was Melanchthon Smith. I'm going to read Alexander Hamilton's quote to you now. The anti-federalists seem to think that pure democracy would be the perfect government. Experience has shown that this idea is false. The ancient democracies of Greece were characterized by tyranny and run by mobs. The anti-federalists also argue that a large representation is necessary to understand the interests of the people. This is not true. Why can't someone understand 50 people as well as he understands 20 people? A new constitution does not make a rich man more eligible for an elected office than a poor person. I also think it's dangerous to assume that men become more wicked as they gain wealth and education. Look at the people in the community, the rich and the poor, the educated and the ignorant. Which group has higher moral standards? Both groups engage in immoral or wicked behavior, but it would seem to me that the behavior of the wealthy is less wicked and sinful. So take a couple minutes, read these two quotes again to yourself, underline the words that you like, the words that you don't like, the sentences you agree with and what you don't agree with, and then when you're done, write down the name you agree with most, and then raise your hand. Alright, now, by a show of hands, who picked Alexander Hamilton? Alright, so Alexander Hamilton was a Federalist. He believed that there should be a larger form of government to control the land. Raise your hand if you were Melanchthon Smith. Alright, he was an anti-Federalist and he did not want a large government to control the land. So, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you come over to this side of the classroom and have the seat in this chair right here. If we had more people in the class, it would be more of them over there, and the other more of them over there. Hamiltonians. So, what I want you guys to do right now in your groups is to go through and talk about why you think the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists are a good idea, or why their government is better. So, Alexander Hamilton, the Federalist, you come up with a list of things and explain why a Federalist government is better than an Anti-Federalist government, or a split government. And you come up with why governments run by states would be better. All right, thanks for writing those things down. I really appreciate it. I like the collaboration that's going on in the group. So, Barry,
Yes.
I'm going to have you go ahead and stand up and list the benefits you came up with for the Anti-Federalist government. And Jeff, as he's saying these things, I want you writing down the benefits of Anti-Federalist government.
Well, I think the states should be taking care of themselves. I think for the state government, regular people will run for office, and you won't have just the rich taking over the poor like we'll see in a big, large federal government. Ordinary people will attempt to run for themselves. The average farmer will be there to take care of themselves. They'll have bigger issues to handle in the federal government that the local states won't want to deal with. So the local states can deal with their smaller issues that just pertain to them. You don't have to worry about all the other states and their big issues that don't matter to them. And then this way the rich can't control everything.
Nice. So control is spread out. It's more distributed to the common person. Like
Right.
I said, a farmer could run for office. A regular person could run for office instead of somebody else across the country controlling things.
Right.
They control their problems that they have. So, for example, today, the local people would be dealing with California's drought instead of people in Washington, D.C. who are totally, completely, physically removed from the problem. Good, I like that. All right, now Jeff, I'm going to ask you to stand up and list why a Federalist government would be better. And Jeff, Barry, as he presents, I want you to go ahead and write down the notes. So as
okay.
he's presenting,
As I'm presenting.
write down
You
the
listen.
benefits of the Federalist government.
Okay.
Well, I don't have very many benefits, but I do have the fact that the Federalists, if you have a Federalist government, you have a little bit more control over the situations that go on because you have more of a united front. And I think the big thing is in creating this Constitution, a show of unity would help. And I think if all the states assume, or all the colonies assumed one title, you have a more united front. And it can take care of the community as a whole instead of individually going through the states. Because if you have individual, like the state, if you have an anti-federalist way and you have a bunch of states, you don't actually have common things. You have more of a confederation instead of a republic.
Okay. So you're thinking more along the lines of a bigger unity and stronger relationships across the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you guys both bring up valid points. One thing I would put into consideration is what happens if there's a war going on. Now we're going to have 50 different states with 50 different armies. That's something to think about as well. You know, because with one federal army or one government, we could have one army protecting all 50 states from members of each state coming together. That's the good thing. That's the good thing about the federal government. But we also have to remember about their rights and what they want and how they want their own individual freedoms, individual rights, because after all, that's what America was founded on, individual freedom and rights.
Well, we don't want one state, sending us to fight for them and them not fighting at all, because they could end up sending all of our people from our state to fight, and they could lay back and just not fight at all. So it wouldn't be fair.
No.
Because there'd be too much control. They could send all of us poorer states to fight their battles for them,
But-
to stay home.
But the same argument can be made that if you're in California and you're being attacked on the West Coast, all these other 49 states are going to send people to you to help protect you. So there's both ends of the spectrum. There's positives and negatives. And honestly, what we have talked about today shows what we went through when we were developing the Constitution. We had people who wanted their individual rights, their individual freedoms. We had people who wanted a more federal government because they saw the benefits of that. Both have positives, both have negatives. And that's why we came up with a compromise. We have the Constitution, the federal government, nothing's on the board right now. We have the Constitution and the federal government, but we also remembered the people's rights, what the anti-federalists wanted, and that's why we have the Bill of Rights, a very important document for the United States. So, to finish, what I want you guys to do on the back of your paper, go ahead and write a brief summary about what you guys experienced, what you guys talked about, what you guys went through, and what you guys decided was fair or not, and the solution you came up with, and how that also relates with the solution that the founders of the government or the developers of the Constitution came up with. A couple key words to think about would be Constitution, Federalist, Anti-Federalist, Compromise, benefits, and that should be good. So go ahead and write 4 to 5 sentences, and then that's going to be your exit ticket for today's lesson.